Bahnstrecke Bremen to Oldenburg was the first German add-on released in the Train Sim World 3 era. I was initially skeptical about it, and waited until it went on sale before picking it up. After more time with this route in my collection, I've decided to revisit it and remake the original review. This add-on was released in December 2022, and it costs a staggering 57 New Zealand dollars at full price. If you've seen my previous TSW reviews, you'll hopefully remember why I'm so annoyed by the high price. For newcomers, and regardless of Dovetail's reason for the price increase, these add-ons are simply not worth the money, especially since the devs continue their infamous practice of releasing questionable or outright rubbish products. I'm looking at you, New York to Trenton! I didn't get this route on or even soon after the release day. Instead, I waited until it was on sale for around $42. Even then, I still think that was too high a price for this lot, especially given how short the route is. I find this route concept to be very strange, because all we get is a linear 44km or 27-mile long route from Bremen Hauptbahnhof to Oldenburg Hauptbahnhof in northwestern Germany. What was so special about this specific section of track that made Dovetail decide to remake it for TSW? It's almost as if the devs didn't realise that there is barely any interesting scenery on this section, apart from the large drawbridge just east of Oldenburg Hauptbahnhof, under which you sometimes see moving barges. I have no idea why Dovetail made the barge compatible with the livery designer. It just seems like a pointless addition to me, but not as much as the action points or those farcical loco add-on bundles. The route is set in the late 2000s, before the Bremen S-Bahn was created, and I'm guessing the only reason why Dovetail chose this time period is because they couldn't get the license to use the actual Bremen S-Bahn livery. Come to think of it, the vast majority of German rolling stock in TSW is just in bog-standard Deutsche Bahn colours, with very few exceptions to the rule, and there's next to no private operators represented in this game, especially on the passenger side. You're able to run standard regional services with the BR110-3 locomotive hauling N-Wagen coaches, or the BR425 electric multiple unit. The former is brand new to the game, and it's a very old design, with over 300 examples being built between 1956 and 1969. These locomotive-hauled services run in a push-pull configuration, with the Karlsruher Kopf cab car always at the Bremen end. You also get a reskin of the BR155 electric locomotive to haul freight trains. Previously, we had this locomotive in the normal Deutsche Bahn red livery as an add-on for Ruhr-Sieg Nord, while this new variant is in the blue press livery. Apart from the livery, and a slight update to the horn sound, I can't tell if anything else has been changed from the original. As for the BR425, we already had that unit with the Duisburg to Bochum route, and I haven't noticed any changes for the Bremen version apart from a slight livery alteration. But I will say that I think this newer Bremen version looks a little better than the Duisburg one. Credit where it's due, at least this route doesn't come with the same old Doppelstockwagen coaches we've seen reused 69 million times over, although they do layer into the lines through Bremen Hauptbahnhof, but only if you've got main Spessartbahn, I think. I also like the drawbridge outside Oldenburg, because it's actually animated, and I initially thought it would just be a static object like these swing bridges on the Wherry Lines route in Train Simulator. It only takes 44 minutes to cover the full route with the BR110-3 and N-Wagen coaches, with the journey involving a tight timetable and 8 intermediate stops. There are only 10 stations on this route, and their names are as follows: Bremen Hauptbahnhof, Bremen Neustadt, Heidekrug, Delmenhorst, Hurrikenkamp, Schierbrock, Buchholzberg, Hude, Woesting, and Oldenburg Hauptbahnhof. Although it's prototypical, it's also disappointing that the BR425 doesn't run all the way to Oldenburg. Instead, you're only able to drive this unit between Bremen Hauptbahnhof and Hude, with just one intermediate stop at Delmenhorst. It only takes around 20 minutes to cover this section in the BR425, and because of how little you can do with this thing, and how short the service is, I question why Dovetail bothered including her in the first place. But at least the unit looks nice and is easy to drive, which is more than I can say for the BR110/3. And speaking of that elderly locomotive, she has a tap changer instead of a conventional throttle. When I was new to this route, I found it very difficult to drive the 110, given how easy it can be to overload the traction motors when you're starting out from a station. Or maybe it's just because I'm not used to locomotives this old. From experience, I've found that it's best to start moving in notch 4 or less, then increase the power as you see fit, making sure to avoid going all the way to notch 28 until you're up to around 85 or 90 kilometers per hour. Annoyingly, there doesn't seem to be any manual available for this route. Typical Dovetail laziness. So there's no instructions on how to drive the BR110/3 outside of the in-game tutorial. I found that slowing down on this thing is neither as easy as mocking New Zealand politicians, nor as hard as Surgeon Simulator. There's an independent brake that only works on the locomotive, as well as the train brake lever. The latter has release, running, off, and minimum settings, before having at least 4 more notches ahead of full service. I usually start slowing down for a station at least 1 kilometre from the stop marker, and the brakes are fairly strong, but sometimes they take an annoyingly long time to release. This makes it very difficult to stop exactly on the marker, even though this doesn't matter too much since those useless action points add sod all to the game. And speaking of stop markers, Dovetail messed up again and left the stop marker on the eastbound platform at Buchholzberg in the wrong place. This means that, if you somehow manage to stop dead on the marker, the cab car will be left off the end of the platform, as seen here. Speaking of cab cars, the Karlsruher Kopf cab car also lacks a conventional throttle, with her tap changer lever being different from the locomotive, yet similar to the UK's Class 86. Rather than having what looks like a steering wheel with 28 notches, this lever has a run-up position to generate power for the traction motors. There are also hold and run-down settings, which are used to either maintain or reduce your power level. One thing I like about the cab car is being able to scroll through the destination display, while most trains in this game will just spawn in with the destination already set, even if they've got a player-changeable display. As for the N-Wagen coaches overall, I remember hearing about how they were apparently a highly requested addition to the game. But since I didn't know too much about German railways, I don't understand the appeal of these coaches, but I do like the old-fashioned aesthetic. Annoyingly, the locomotive's tail lights are off by default when you spawn a service with the cab car leading, and in most cases you don't have enough time to run back to the other end and switch the tail lights on. A similar issue is present with the MBTA rolling stock in the Boston Sprinter pack. Besides the BR110/3 and those reskins for the BR155 and BR425, plenty of motive power from other add-ons appears on this route in timetable mode. These include, but are not limited to, the Vossloch G6 diesel shunter, Deutsche Bahn BR612 diesel multiple unit, and overused BR185/2 electric locomotive, plus the MRCE and railpool variants. This would be fine as long as those locomotives and units actually ran on this line in real life around the late 2000s. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I once heard that the BR612s never actually ran on the Bremen to Oldenburg section in real life. I think Dovetail were just trying to make the route feel busy while only using the rolling stock that's already in the game, all at the potential expense of historical accuracy. Ordinarily I don't comment on the sounds, but I noticed that the whistle on the BR110/3 is reused from the BR420 unit in Train Simulator. At least, that's the way I see it. For all I know, it could have been recorded from something completely different. The sounds on the BR425 are reused from the Hauptstrecke Rhein-Ruhr variant, and for once, the reused sounds are actually tolerable. Comparing footage of the real thing to its in-game counterpart, I'd say the motor sounds are pretty spot on. Unless you've got motive power layered in from other add-ons, the BR110/3 and N-Wagen coaches are the only equipment you can use if you want to do a full-length run on this route. Depending on your PC specifications, assuming you do what I do and play this thing on PC, the line through Bremen Hauptbahnhof can be very laggy if you got most of the German DLC, with an awful lot of trains appearing in the station as a result. I dare say that, if you only had the base game plus Bremen to Oldenburg, the line would be much quieter and the frame rates would be more consistent. The scenery is quite basic outside of built-up areas, although that's not to say the city detail is any better. Most of the line past Bremen Neustadt, the first station after Bremen Hauptbahnhof, is just open countryside, with the usual flat grass texture and no proper foliage detail visible in too many places to mention here. One area that I found especially disappointing was at Delmenhorst station, where, for some reason, Dovetail left a section of the overhead wire missing. Rather annoyingly, this wasn't the first time they had screwed up something so simple, and they still haven't fixed it. They must have got their priorities wrong, if the apparent existence of this pointless TSW4 thing is anything to go by. There's also this large open field right next to Hoekenkamp station, as well as a large field next to the track around 1 kilometre from Bremen Hauptbahnhof, and both of these fields have no grass detail whatsoever. Jarring areas like this really do take one out of the immersion. Overall, I still have mixed thoughts on the Bahnstrecke Bremen to Oldenburg DLC. While it's nice to finally get some old-fashioned rolling stock for a change, and the BR110/3 provides a decently challenging driving experience, the whole pack is let down by the route simply being way too short and linear. It gets very boring after only a few journeys, not to mention that barge's pointless livery designer compatibility. I would have an easier time deciding whether or not I could recommend this route if it was longer, and actually continued further to Wilhelmshaven Hauptbahnhof or Hanover. Or, at the very least, just extend the route to Nordenham so you could drive the BR425's entire service instead of it being cut short at Herde.